All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So this will be recorded for those that are going to come in a little bit later or weren't able to make it. The purpose of today is just to give you guys a platform, our DO students, with different residents who've mastered these surgical subspecialties. We have 4 amazing people that were willing to give up an hour on a Saturday, which is really nice of them. We've been doing this for like 3 years now. Every year, I try to get a different set of speakers to come and just talk to you guys about their experience and any questions you guys have to help guide you along your path in pursuing whatever specialty you want. We're going to be focusing on surgical subspecialties. And since we started this 3 years ago in COVID, there's been an increase in other specialties and even individual departments, so on and so forth, doing similar webinars and informational meetings. And I think that's great and amazing. It's been kind of a new trend we're seeing, but I still feel like in a lot of those sessions, DO specific concerns aren't addressed. So as long as that's the case, as long as we feel like our DO specific issues or questions are not being addressed, we'll keep trying to do this every year. And just to set the stage before we get into introducing the speakers, this is the post ACGME single accreditation era, meaning now every residency is in one system. And for you younger students, you won't know this, but in the past, what used to happen was you had to pick between the MD match or the NRMP match and the DO AOA match. So you had to self-select. If you wanted to do orthopedic surgery, you had to decide if you were competitive enough to take the risk to apply to just the MD match, or if you wanted to keep it safe and go the DO match. And if you matched the DO match, which was earlier, you would automatically be pulled from the MD match. So that was a tough dilemma that a lot of students were in. And now the benefit of a single match is at one time you apply for historically MD and historically DO programs. And we're seeing that our match rate is 91%, our placement rate's 99% as a whole. So the match single accreditation process has been very successful. And we're seeing DOs and MDs match at new programs that they've never matched at before for the first time. And some of our panelists, including myself, were the first DOs at our programs. And lastly, one thing we know as a DO student, we don't have as many fancy departments. And because of that, we don't have access to as many mentors, research, letters of recommendation, networking, which you often need to match into these competitive fields. So we're here to be a resource for you guys. But one thing that is always advantageous is a research year. So if you're interested in ophthalmology and you're here for the ophthalmology part of things, Research to Prevent Blindness is an organization that's very prestigious in the ophthalmology world. And they are offering a research grant restricted to just DO students, where you'll get a year of funded research. That's a research position with a stipend that's being funded in part with Research to Prevent Blindness and the DO ophthalmology and ENT colleges. So I would recommend that you Google Research to Prevent Blindness and you look into applying for that research year, because if you have that on your resume, it's going to significantly boost your chance. And there's only going to be, I bet you, 3 or 4 or 5 people applying for this, because the pool of students looking at these at this specialty is so low already. And if you have any further questions, you can ask me after. Now, to get into our speakers, we have myself. I'm a DO at Loma Ophthalmology. We have Michael Kortz, who's gonna come in when he's able to get off of call. He's at University of Colorado for neurosurgery. We have Nguyen, who is University of Michigan, cardiothoracic surgery. Jake Checketts, Oklahoma State orthopedic surgery, and Divy Mehra, who is at Dartmouth for ophthalmology. So I think Michael's not here, so we'll start with Nguyen. If you can talk to us about your journey briefly and how you ended up where you are and any tips that you have for students, and then we'll go on to the next speaker from there.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our talk tonight, and thank you so much for having me. So I'm Chi-Chi. I'm a first year going on second year at University of Michigan in their CT surgery program. I started off as a first generation Vietnamese American. I went to Carnegie Mellon to study biomedical engineering and psychology. I actually had a very hard time in college academically because of being a first generation and being my first time away from home. And so after college, I did research in an artificial lung lab with biomedical engineering. And that was my first exposure to CT surgery, and actually where I fell in love with CT surgery. So when it came time to apply for medical school, I had a tough time, definitely. And PCOM was actually the only school to give me a chance. And so for me, I then came back home, because home is Philadelphia for me, to go to medical school. And something that I learned during that time is to take advantage of everything that I had around me, but also to make opportunities for myself that are not there. So those are the two tips that I would give for DO students specifically. Is we don't have as many resources out there, especially with surgical subspecialties, but to network as much as you can and to make those opportunities for yourself. So one of the questions in the chat that I already see is like what we did like for networking. And I definitely would say, go to conferences, cold email people. I cold emailed two of the program directors that were doing interviews my year, and I actually ended up getting interviews there because of it. So it's definitely something that I always am a huge advocate of. And then second of all, to find mentors that will advocate for you. And so now that I'm at Michigan, I'm very, very happy. And I definitely want to talk about my field and get as many DOs to join as much as possible. So ask away after this, any questions that you have.
Thank you. That was epic. Now we have Mr. Jake Checketts. And Jake, if I'm butchering your last name, I apologize.
No, you got it, brother. Thank you. So my name's Jake. As he said, I'm at Oklahoma State for a residency right now. I'm going on third year. It's been a good experience so far for me. From Utah originally. I went to Weber State, and I always thought I wanted to be a physician. I have tetralogy of Fallot, so that kind of led me to that. And really had, college was hard because, my parents are construction workers, didn't really know what to do. I eventually figured it out though, and was lucky enough to get into several DO schools, one of which being Oklahoma State. And so the first time I ever went to, Oklahoma was when I interviewed here for med school and fell in love with it. In med school, I knew I wanted to do something competitive. Originally, I was between CT surgery and orthopedic surgery. And so I just knew I had to do something competitive. We're a little lucky at Oklahoma State because we have a research team and we do have some resources which we can take advantage of. And so I got on this research team and kind of ran with it. I graduated med school with over almost 40 publications, and that really set me up nicely for applying orthopedic surgery. And it also helped me develop good mentors with, like, when I was a first or second year, our current program director, Dr. Norris, who's an MD, took over the program and really changed everything. He was obviously interested in research, as he's really trying to, up the academic stature of the program at the time. And so he became a big mentor to me, and I worked really close with him, which was obviously advantageous. I think the other thing I always add in about my story is that I did all right on boards, but not great. I was in the 230s on step one. People don't throw out numbers very often, so I like to, just so people know. And low 600s on COMLEX, so like nothing to write home about, but respectable. And because of the letters that I acquired from Dr. Norris, and as well as the research, obviously, I had over 15 orthopedic interviews, interviewed at Harvard, Mayo, all the places. Ultimately decided to stay in Oklahoma for various reasons. A lot of it being even stuff outside of orthopedics, housing market, have a family, just various things. And so now here I am a few years later, and I'm really happy with my choice. I'm really happy that, Oklahoma State gave me the opportunity, and, similar to Chi, like she said, you just have to take advantage of your opportunities. Every school has different options. Some schools have more than others. But, when regardless, you just got to find a way. I think one of the questions is how to make a positive impression on away rotations. And this does vary by specialty, but I'll speak for orthopedics. And in general, what you'll hear is, it sounds so simple, and the sad thing about it is that sometimes it's out of your control, but really you just have to do your best to fit in well. And so that doesn't mean you need to fit a certain stereotype, but it just means that you need to be able to, read the room, have fun with everyone. Orthopedics in general is a more lighthearted specialty. And so you just have to be able to, learn when it's time to get serious and help out, and maybe go and get some stuff preemptively to help out. And you have to learn when it's time to joke around with the team, and it sounds so simple, but really that's what we're looking for. It's a hard specialty. We work hard, and we just need people who are going to put the team above, not necessarily above themselves, but at least respect that we're all in this together and work hard for it. So that's kind of my advice.
Thank you. And Divy, go ahead, man.
Hey, how's it going? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, so my name is Divy. I'm an incoming ophthalmology resident at the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center here in New Hampshire. I'll be starting my intern year this Monday, so just graduated med school and a bit closer to the process. Thanks, Harris, for organizing the webinar, for being a mentor to me, and also inviting me. I hope you can all learn something from my experience, even if you're not specifically interested in ophthalmology. Just a quick background about me. I was born in India, mostly grew up in New Jersey. I went to Nova Southeastern University in South Florida for a 7-year direct program. So I did college and medical school there. I ended up loving my experience there, even though it wasn't a traditional big name college or medical school, but it definitely came with challenges when it came to applying, through the match process. I also ended up taking a leave between my 3rd and 4th years. I did a research year in the University of Miami health system. I met some incredible mentors that really kind of fueled my application process. From the beginning of medical school, I knew I wanted to do ophthalmology, and I knew it was going to be a difficult path as a DO student, but I didn't really understand what that entailed. Really, long story short, what it means is that you kind of need to be exceptional at everything medical school kind of throws at you, because you never know which aspects of those will, kind of come to fruition in the end. A couple of notes about DO schools that I wrote down. I think that DO schools are absolutely excellent at producing some of the hardest working and clinically capable people I'll ever meet in my life. But preclinicals are really rough. I took about 100 exams in those first 2 years, and it can really be incredibly time consuming with every moment you have in your life. And secondly, there's usually a lack of in-house research. So you have to be really aggressive and find that elsewhere. Surgical subspecialties really, cling to prestige, brand name schools and academic, value. And DO schools are often lacking those categories. So you kind of have to get connected there. So when I came to Miami for my clinical rotations, and I kind of made it my #1 goal to get connected to research leaders in the U Miami system, because I knew it was going to be important to capitalize on my own interests and my effort. So that kind of gets to my first tip, which is to get connected to the right places. You kind of want to be connected to people that understand the process, are relevant to the field, and are hyper academic, because there's no reason to shy away from that academic sphere, which your DO school may not necessarily connect you to. And the second thing is just to be kind to everyone, and get help from everyone, and do it shamelessly. You're not going to get through this alone. And this can mean residents, this can mean other medical students applying to the same specialty. It can mean your teachers, your deans, people in academic programs, people that run programs. Email them, DM them on Twitter, DM them on Instagram. You never know who you're going to meet that you can build a symbiotic relationship with, and that'll be key to your future career.
Thank you. And then Michael is running around like a chicken right now in Colorado. So when he is able to come in, he's just going to come in. He's just going to drop his gems. So before we get to some of these questions, one tip that I always give everybody, and including some of the people on this panel that I know I've known in the past, is like don't self-select yourself out of programs or places or specialties. And I think Mike is actually here. So if he wants to go in and go ahead and introduce himself and do that.
Yeah, what's up? How's it going, man? How you doing, man?
Good to see you.
You too. So besides kind of quick intros, anything else that you'd want us to?
Yeah, quick intro,
touch on?
and then like any maybe like a tip or two, generally speaking, that you have for students.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Mike. I I'm originally from Denver. I grew up here and then went to college at Baylor University. Ended up at Kansas City University. I never knew I wanted to do the whole doctor thing, and ended up there. Didn't know what I wanted to do, and then about midway through second year, early third year is when I really started to decide that I wanted to do neurosurgery, and that's where I ended up. I matched at University of Colorado. Super stoked. I'm on my third day, and I'm getting obliterated. So it'll get better, but I feel very fortunate to be here for sure. Let's see, some general tips. I think one of the big things for me is like, it's not so much the DO thing. I mean, the DO thing definitely matters. And I'm sure there are some DOs on here. I went to a DO school. I think a big thing is that it's not having a home program. You don't have someone to advocate for you. And so establish one somewhere, especially if you want to do subspecialty surgery or dermatology or whatever. I think that's really important. That was like, I think, game changer for me. I hate networking. I think it's the dumbest thing in the world, but it definitely matters. And so I started like taking the necessary steps to finding advocates. And, like the chair here, he wrote a really good letter for me. And, he's just a chill dude, but, I definitely put myself out there. So I think that's really important. And that can be done through research. I'm sure people talk about that. That can be done through a weird relative or something. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, there's no shame. People are doing it at USC and Stanford and Hopkins, so you might as well do it too. I do think that, like, from a logistics standpoint, like if you're, in your younger years or whatever, I think the step one, going past fail, you're going to have to set yourself apart more so on the research side for sure, and better on the letters. Like, if you want to do neurosurgery, you need 4 solid neurosurgery letters. And now that COVID's kind of, I don't know how everyone is doing it now, but now that COVID is kind of not as big of a deal, like, try to do as many sub-Is as you can and get 4 strong letters. And that's true for most surgical subspecialties. Like, I get emails sometimes and people will be like, hey, I kind of want to do neurosurgery. I'm in the end of my third year, and like, I've got one family or, like one community neurosurgeon letter and then like a radiologist. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I think obviously not having a home program means you don't have home departments. It means you don't have people advising you. And it's just like those conversations. It's like, there's like a first year, like, you're hanging out with the service all the time. And that's not something that a lot of people get the luxury of. So I think those are 2 big things, just like really finding ways to get yourself plugged in and become part of the group. Like, I did things on a virtual scale, and just kind of get your name out there as best you can. And try weird ways of like networking. I saw a deficit and I was like, how am I going to do this? And so I was like, oh, I've always enjoyed podcasting. Maybe I'll start a podcast. And like, that was a good way. Like, I had conversations with like the inventor of Cyberknife and like all this crazy stuff, that I got to meet people in the field that I wouldn't have met otherwise. So like, be creative. It doesn't have to just be research. It can be other ways too. But I just think that's really important. And then, yeah, like, obviously crush step 2 and those sorts of things. But I think that's beating a dead horse. So.
And then Mike, since you probably have to come in and out, there's a question directed to you that I'll give you right now. Someone is saying that they have a shadowing experience coming up with a neurosurgeon. And they're wondering if you have any tips on how to make a best impression in that shadowing setting. Is there resources? Is it an intangible thing? Is it a knowledge thing? Or if so, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's actually a good question. People always just say like do it, and then not like how. I think you have to is like show initiative and be dependable. I think that's easy to say, but like you're so hungry for opportunities that you'll like almost and this is a good luxury to have, but you'll start to overstretch yourself and then you can't follow through. Don't do that. Like follow through on something that someone gives you, whether it's research or like a quality improvement project or go see a patient, whatever, like follow through. The second part of that is bring something to the table. Like try to find a research idea, try to find, like don't get in the way, but try to find ways to help out in the clinic or even in the lab. And even if you don't have like a good concrete idea, like coming to the attending or a resident with that is really good. So it just shows initiative. And if you can come up with something really strong and it is ultimately is something that they're interested in, then that's a mentorship. I think mentorship is by itself kind of dumb. I think like shared objective mentorship where like you guys are working on a project together is much more fruitful. So if you can establish that, that would be a good way to get it done. And that's why research is like such a good way. It's not because people want to see that you can like write 30 bogus case reports like or case series. Like there's so many people out there that have those. I mean, yeah, okay, great. But what really matters is that you show that you're dedicated to the specialty and that you can follow through on a project. You'll get a few questions here and there about research, especially if you're like PhD level work and you're doing good wet lab stuff. But like for the most part, it's not so much like that you're a great researcher. It's that you show that you want to be here and you're willing to kind of be hazed in a little bit, in a little bit of a way. Like you're willing to put in that work and show that you're really dedicated to it. But there are other ways to show yourself you're dedicated to it too. So I think, like I said, trying to get involved at national organizations, virtual stuff, conferences as best you can, that sort of thing, I think is a good way to do it too. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And now, Chi-Chi, there's a question directed to you about CT surgery. And he or she is asking about using Twitter messaging as a way to cold call and contact people if their email is not accessible. Is that something that you would recommend? Is that inappropriate? Is that the new norm?
So I would always go the most formal route first. I would definitely email first because you're at the end of the day, you're asking for a job when you're looking to match. And so I would definitely go by email first. And the thing with CT surgery is if you go on CTNet, I think it's cts.net or something like that, CTSnet, you can find everyone's emails. And so it may not be on the website, but it'll be on that website. And so I would do that first. And if you can't reach them that way, then I would try Twitter. It's not that it's like taboo to like try Twitter. Like my chair, before being my chair, messaged me on Twitter. I've had people reach out before the interview trail, like on Twitter. I just like am someone who would rather get an email before getting a Twitter message.
And then so one of the things that people are asking about is, networking. And some of the things that I did and I suggest is you find your local department, whether it's ophthalmology, ENT, whatever the case, and you email their program coordinator and you ask if you can attend their grand rounds, and you try to go maybe once a month or once every couple of months, and you introduce yourself to people in a sincere way, and then you get an in. That's what I did at University of Arizona, and I met the chair of ophthalmology there. I said hello to him a few times. Then he noted that, this brown guy, who is this guy in the back? And we started making conversation. He wrote me a letter. I did research with him, blah, blah, blah. That was one way. Another thing I did was I joined the State Society. You go to their website. For me, I was in New Mexico. So New Mexico Osteopathic Medical Society. and you email them and you ask them about their advocacy day, if you can get involved. And then that brings you to a bunch of other connections. So state society, grand rounds, social media are all great. Another question that either Jake or Divy or both of you can answer is this idea of backups. So some people are asking about, did you apply for general surgery as a backup? What are your guys' thoughts on that? What is the right approach? Is it variable? What do you guys think?
I don't think Jake was listening. I'll take it. So I think it's a good idea to apply to a backup specialty. I think that if you want to ease kind of the nerves of the whole entire match process, which unfortunately can kind of ruin the first half of fourth year, you can pretty much eliminate all of that stress by just sending out more applications. Obviously, it costs a little more and you have to prepare a personal statement, get some letters. But if you're sincerely interested in another specialty or multiple other specialties, if that is, your personality, then I would recommend doing it. I don't think there's any harm in doing it at all, except for, I guess, the financial cost or maybe scheduling interviews. But especially since they're virtual, if you have a sincere interest in another specialty, you should 100% apply to programs, because there might be factors like geography or program culture that might be really important to you, and you may not actually be as dedicated to one particular specialty. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I think I'll add, so what I've been telling people recently, I think honestly, orthopedics is probably the best case study from a DO perspective, just from as far as what's happening after the merger, just because there's a lot more orthopedic DO residencies in general. And so you can kind of see, whereas like cardiothoracics and ophtho, there's just less applicants, and so it's just harder to have as much numbers to know what's going on. This year in orthopedics, the match rate for DOs was low 50s, and the match rate for MDs was 65%, which is also similarly very low. And so the problem is getting so competitive right now that what I tell people is to apply to a backup no matter what. So whether it's general surgery or whatever, but maybe even the other route, so I always tell people, okay, if I couldn't have matched orthopedic surgery, what would have been a win for me, right? You're in med school right now as an investment, even if it is your calling, to do this, it's also a huge investment, right? So what would be worth your time and effort? And for me, if I wouldn't have matched orthopedic surgery, but I matched family medicine at McKay in Ogden, Utah, which is my hometown, that would have been a huge win for me, honestly, like after it was all said and done. And so that's my advice would be, the problem with the scramble is you can't control anything. You can't control the specialty, you can't control the location, you can't control anything. But if you apply to a backup specialty, especially, gen surg is still pretty competitive. It's not exactly a backup. It's you've got better odds, but it's not exactly a backup. But if you have a location that you'd be happy with, and they've got some family med or they've got some whatever, that's would be my advice. Would be, that would be a huge win for me. I didn't apply to a backup because mostly just because I just didn't. But if I was applying now, I definitely would. And that would be my personal strategy. I wouldn't apply to, I didn't enjoy really any special, oddly enough, the only things I really enjoyed was orthopedics and psych. So I probably would have applied psych as a backup or some family med and like whatever, but would be my take on the backup situation is you probably need it these days. For if your goal is surgical subspecialty, you need something else, because it just, for the sake of your investment, it's just too competitive. Don't hurt yourself, and or at least have a plan. At least be like, okay, if I'm not going to match, I'm going to do a research here, I'm going to do this or that. Just don't go blindly into the match, because some amazing people that have amazing apps go unmatched every year. So just have a plan.
Worst case scenario, one of the benefits DOs have is you can always just do OMM. You can just do it OMT fellowship, dude, and you can just, live the life in Beverly Hills and just promote that, I mean, South Beach, these places love that kind of stuff.
All right,
So,
I'm gonna log off now. If you're gonna talk about O, man, I'm out, dude. No, I actually have a point. I kind of want to follow, but I totally agree with them. But I think it's so variable. I mean, like, still, like, I mean, I was actually really kind of surprised by, and this is not to like, brag or anything, but I was actually kind of surprised at how many interviews I got. I think, it is person dependent. One thing that I always tell people is like, yes, exactly. Like Jake said, think about a backup plan 100% and envision yourself going to every single place and every single specialty that you'd apply to. And if you like could not see yourself there and you're like, oh my gosh, I'd rather not match or be somewhere else or do something else than be there or do that, then obviously don't do that. I think we get so kind of caught up in the rat race of trying to get to a particular specialty. Like we're talking about specialties, right? That we kind of lose sight of like what that actually means. And so just like be introspective about that, talk to your friends and family, but ultimately go with your gut. And I think, trying to find advisors in the field is like the first step, big time. So anyway, I totally agree with you guys. I'm gonna have to head out, but if there's anything else that I can like, I don't know if people have questions or something. But yeah, I don't know if we're doing anything like that, Ahmed, but
yeah, everyone on Twitter and whatnot, they can reach out to you guys. And I'm sure, you guys are all busy, but I'm sure that, that's one way they can contact you guys on the banner. They can see your name and
cool.
Social media. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for putting this together. This is awesome.
Of course. One fun story about Mike is me and he reached out to me on social media. We wrote a paper on MedEd, and it's going to be very controversial, and it's under review right now. And it's about licensing. It's about accreditation of DO and MD medical schools. So stay tuned for that. Chichi, there's a question by Grace Lee here, and she is asking for you. As a female physician, can you speak on wanting a family versus wanting to go into a surgical subspecialty? Is that even a dichotomy that is does it need to be viewed that way, or what are your thoughts in general about that question?
Yeah, so I think that approaching your want to go into the surgical subspecialty, I don't think that it should be a thought whether you're going to have a family or not. I think that you should do whatever you want to do. But I also think that you need to give it thought as well when you're going through the process of when you want to have children. For me specifically, so I had an early interest in CT surgery. I know the lifestyle, I know how tough it is, but I did not let that sway me away from wanting to go into the field. But now that I'm in the field, I want to make sure that I'm in a program that will not only support that, but also will give me the time off, will give me the research years in order to be able to start a family. And so my significant other is actually in Charleston doing CT surgery as well. And so we're doing long distance and it's tough, but I decided to do my research years in Charleston instead so that we can start a family then, but to still come back and do my clinical years. So I don't think that you have to give up, your surgical subspecialty and what you want to do, but I think that you do need to make sure that you think through when you want to have a family, if that's something that you want.
Thank you. We have a question about single licensing exam. It's something that I've been very aggressive about in the last few years, and you can kind of look up some of the papers we've done on that, and the AMA just adopted it as a position. But I think it's something that you won't deal with right now in the next 5 years or so. But I would recommend, and this is my opinion, that everyone take USMLE step 1 and step 2. Even though step 1 is pass fail, it could still be used by certain programs as a filter, and you don't want to be filtered out by a click. So you want to still, unfortunately, take step 1, even though it's pass fail. And you definitely want to take step 2, and it's about maximizing your opportunities. And by not taking step 2, you're just reducing the percentage of programs that will take you. And this has been studied. This is not somebody's feeling or a guess. It's been studied that if you take the step series, your chance of matching across the board, even in internal med and emergency med, is significantly higher. And then, so now we have some questions here about research. And Divy and Jake, I mean, all of you guys are monsters in terms of research. Someone is asking, in terms of backup, is it better to apply for a backup or just apply to your own specialty that you want and then take a research year or do a pre-residency fellowship instead of doing the backup specialty?
I think the answer to that depends on how much of medicine in general is an investment to you. And I mean that purely in a dollar signs kind of way. So, and I say this because my view on this is totally flip-flop. And this is what's hard about it. And I'll also, in answering this, I'll piggyback off of the family question, because I have kids, but I didn't have kids when I went into this. And, you know, I came in totally on the calling train, right? I have tetralogy. This is why I'm here. I'm going to do this. And it's still a large chunk of it. But now that I have a family, there's definitely a lot more of a investment side of it, right? It's one of those things where it's like, look, I've got to, you know, take care of my daughters and I've got to make sure that they're set up. I mean, like, well, people die young all the time. What if I die young? They've got to be set up. And so it really depends. So for me, in that mindset, I would for sure go back up no matter what, just because it wouldn't be worth the year to me. However, if that's not where your mind is, I think the move would be a research year. If it's like, no, I'm doing this no matter what, it'd be a research year, but you'd have to pick it very, very carefully, because I try and, you know, I try and really emphasize this to people that the purpose of said research year is not necessarily numbers, right? You need the connections. You know, we've all emphasized the importance of finding some sort of connection some way. I am, because of my closeness with our program director, I have reviewed, single-handedly reviewed every application we've received over the last 3 years. So I've got a bank of about, you know, over 2,000 applications from, you know, DOs and MDs over the last few years. And it's very enlightening to look at people who do research years and what they get out of it. And the people who really crush it, and it's fun watching these people match on there, and they match at all these awesome places, and people are like, oh, how'd you do it? Well, it's like, you know, because like these people all did the same thing. They went somewhere, somebody took them under their wing, and it was their letters that set them apart. Everyone who does a research year has 10 to 15 pubs. Like, that's just what happens. You do a research year, you get pubs. That's why you're there. It's literally your job. But the people who really, really take off with it found someone who took them under their wing, and it just exudes out of their whole application, their letters, this, that, and the people are like, you have to take this person. That's what you need. So you can just do a willy-nilly, you know, that's if you're going to take a year off, getting crappy pay, you're losing a year of physician and salary. So like in orthopedics, the average is over 600,000. You're losing $600,000, which is a lot more money over time to take said research year. You really need to make it maximized, and you have to talk to people, you know, so you need that plan in place. You know, you need to be going to, you know, find someone who's done it and be like, okay, what is are there good research years? Are there ones where somebody would recommend, or they're this, or they're that? So it just depends on where your head's at. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but that's just what it is, you know.
David, you did a research year at Bascom Palmer, which is the #1, you know, eye hospital in the world. And do you think that was a good decision?
I would probably answer it kind of along the same lines as Jake here. I think it's actually, yeah, it's a very personal decision, because obviously you're extending a year of your life, right? So you can think of it as taking a year off your last year of working. That would be the financial way of looking at it. It's also, you know, a personal decision. I didn't have significant funding. I pretty much was able to make some money during the year working as a research assistant, but it wasn't enough to cover my living expenses. So I think that, like Jake said, connecting to people is if the goal is to match into a surgical subspecialty, then and to set yourself up for a good career from a research perspective, then the best thing to do is to find one of those research fellowships. If you throw yourself into, if you want to keep the door open for other things, then doing an intern year or prelim year after medical school would probably be the best way to go. I don't think that a research fellowship of any kind would be advisable after you've graduated medical school, the statistics really show that that will not really help you out very, very much. And I do know, while I have heard of some success stories, I've heard of more not success stories. So I think that would be my general advice. If you're still in medical school, you want to do the research thing, do it during medical school. If you go for it and you don't match, then going that route, you have to set your expectations realistically. And the statistics are kind of bleak.
So Chi-Chi, we have a question now for you. People are asking about away rotations. How many do you do? How many should you do? How do you decide which ones to do an away rotation at? You choose safety ones, compare, like what is the approach that you took?
So for CT surgery, it's a little bit different in that anyone that applies for the integrated program also applies for general surgery, just because there's three different ways to get to that end goal. So I always recommended that you had a separate application for general surgery and a separate one for CT surgery. So in order to do so, you would have to do sub-Is at both. So for CT surgery, it's definitely more, it's more valuable part of the interview process because they usually only pick like one or two people per program. So they want to know that, they're going to like who they work with, and they know that it's someone who will do really well within the program. So I would say prioritizing sub-Is for CT surgery over general surgery for sure. So I think when it comes to general surgery, they just want to make sure that, you're not weird. You can get along with everyone else. Whereas CT surgery, it's like, okay, you know the field, you know what you're getting yourself into, people in the field, stuff like that. I initially had planned for, I think, like 3 CT surgery and 1 general surgery sub-I, but it all got messed up with COVID. Because I remember I wanted to do something at the end of 3rd year and then my first 2 months of summer. So I ended up only doing I think 1 of each. And it turned out fine because I used all of my research mentors to write my letters as well. So I think that's why it's so important to have those mentors before even interview season, because you never know what's going to happen, and you're definitely going to need them to write a letter for you.
And then for opto, I think what I always tell people is you go to your residency or your medical school coordinator and you grab them by their collar and you demand that they give you the maximum amount of away rotations humanly possible, because one of the ways that you can mitigate the fact that we are unknown entities is by doing more away rotations. So I did 4 away rotations, a combination of 2 and 4 week ones. I did it in different regions in hopes that it would unlock those regions. I don't know if that's actually a myth or if that actually worked, but I did end up getting interviews in all the regions I did rotations in, and that was my approach, because I think you have to just overcome that unknown factor, because I think it's not really the degree, it's the fact that we don't have the departments is what holds us back. And so that again goes back to another question people are asking that I always mention, don't necessarily only choose programs that have had a DO. And I think that's true, because what ends up happening is wherever there's a DO at a program, at ENT, at CT surgery, opto, or whatever, DOs start flooding that place. 30 DOs will start applying for away rotations. That's what happened at Loma Linda. I'm noticing now that a bunch of DOs will want to do an opto rotation there, but you end up having to compete with more DOs. So if you choose a place that's never had one of us, you're more unique, in my opinion. One other thing, someone talked about being unique. I think Michael talked about a podcast. So you don't have to be Nobel laureate or be like Jake and have 50 million publications like a stud that he is, but you can just do something that's different. For example, I did a lot of health policy stuff. So I was doing a lot of advocacy work. I helped pass some resolutions. And the point is you want to do something, whether it's music, podcasts, whether you're a runner at a high level, whatever the case is, you want to be able to do something that is unique to you, so that in an interview setting, you become the expert in the room during the discussion. So for me, when we were talking about health policy with my interviewer, I typically became the expert because I had more experience than them. So they got to see how I could articulate myself in a area where I was the expert communicating knowledge to them. And so that like dynamic shift in an interview setting, I think is profound for the person that is interviewing you, because the dynamics are typically the opposite. No matter how much research you do, the person you're interviewing with is probably more experienced than you in the topic that you research. So they in the end are the expert. So, for another small funny thing is I was like in a movie, I was an extra during medical school. I was a Afghan villager in the movie 12 Strong, and it was like a joke and it was fun. And like that came up in every interview and that made me memorable. So it doesn't have to necessarily be some insane discovery that you did or you saved some, a bunch of kittens or something. It can also be just something fun. And then other people are asking about what stage can we determine if we're competitive for these subspecialties? Is it after your third year or the middle of your third year after step 2 scores? What are benchmarks that you should use to determine how competitive you are? And any of you guys can take that.
I think it depends. In orthopedics is a little different because, if you're not doing 5 to 7 months of auditions in orthopedics, like you're just not going to be taken seriously. And like people be like, oh, they don't really want it, and so oddly enough, applying orthopedics happens during your 4th year because it's such a fit specialty and such a for better or worse, they're some of the stereotypes about like working hard and team and this and that are pretty true for orthopedics, and you just have to pass that litmus test. And like I tell people, it really, you need to play ball as far as your scores and stuff go, but you can't, it's really his 4th year. For example, Madison, one of our incoming interns who matched with us, she just crushed her audition so much. And like I said, I've read literally thousands of applications over the last few years, and I don't know what hers looks like. Like she just destroyed her application so much that it was like, yeah, she's got to be number 1, right? That was just the discussion, and so orthopedics, you can actually, because you're doing 5 to 7 auditions, and if you do a good job, that will net you 5 to 7 interviews. It really, in orthopedics, is your 4th year. And that's what's unfortunate, is that, that's why we're having these discussions, because it's a little late by then. If all of a sudden no interviews come in, you're in a bad spot. And so, you want to meet the benchmarks, the step scores of this or that. You need pubs, but you really have to be very witty about how you rotate, and I really emphasize, what's been said about not rotating where other DOs go. A big example of that is like the Mayo Clinic. They've matched 2 DOs in orthopedics, and every year they get like 15 DOs trying to audition there. So what you want to rotate is, so if your friend, say you're applying, optho, and you hear of a DO who got an interview at Kentucky as a non-rotator and they don't have a DO, they didn't match there, that could be a good place to rotate, because you're like, okay, well, they're willing to go to this DO, they're willing to look at a DO without rotating. They didn't match there, so now the floodgates aren't opened. Maybe I'll go there. Like you got to be kind of witty about it, especially in fields that require auditions like ortho.
And then briefly, I just commented, I want to say it also because it's being recorded. Don't view, like, many DO programs are like amazing. That historically DO, they're like better than a lot of the MD programs. And in ophthalmology, for example, PCOM has like an insanely good ophthalmology program. So don't frame it as DO programs or safety net programs. That's not the case. They're some of them are stronger, some of them are weaker. It's all a mix. So don't use that framework.
I think just to piggyback with that, I mean, and when I said I matched at OSU for various reasons, obviously I had some insider info on how the program ran, but I've scrubbed over 2,000 cases in my first 2 years. And that's not like procedures, that's surgical cases. And, to put it in perspective, this is why I didn't want to go there. At Harvard, which is a top 5 ortho program, you don't really go in the OR till you're 30, and that's fine. People who match there are set up in very different ways than how I'm going to be set up, right? And so that may be what's best for you. But just to piggyback off that, you'll find, again, this is an investment, and you'll find different things that might fit you. So I was strictly going for case volume and sprinkled, if possible, with cost of living for my family and different things. And so, definitely understand that you have to look at those things in order to have a good fit at programs too. You want to fit in with where you're trying to go.
So Chi and Divy, any parting thoughts or advice that you have for everyone before we end?
I think the only thing I wanted to push back on a little bit was just about where to do away rotations. I don't know where the best places are. I will say I have done aways at places that really aren't ever going to take a DO in the near future until leadership changes. And honestly, there's no good way to find out what places those are before you get there. I did an away at one place where none of my co-rotators got interviews, and the other 3 were MDs. So those are the kinds of things they're unfortunate, they happen. There's no way to foresee them in any particular way. And yeah, and just be relentless, go ahead, find your places. You never know which opportunities are kind of going to be the ones for you. It might be a conference, it might be someone you reached out to on Twitter, it might be one research project in a very niche kind of context that somebody really likes. So, put your foot out there and just kind of be shameless for the next couple of months, assuming you're a third year going about it soon, and just go and capture it, and then walk the walk when you get those opportunities.
I want to echo that as well. I think that networking is like your biggest strength going into interview season. And for example, my chief now, I met him at our STS conference 2 years ago. And he was one of my biggest advocates during interview season as to why I'm at Michigan, as well as my chair right now. He met me on Twitter, and was my huge advocate during interview season as well. So I think that exactly what Divy said, you never know who's going to advocate for you, what opportunities you're going to be able to get yourself. So just make those opportunities for yourself, put your best foot forward, and reach out to anyone and everyone.
And my parting advice before we get to Jake is enjoy the process. Don't get too caught up in the hype. Don't think that, once I match, then I'm going to be happy, everything's going to be chill. No, because then there'll be new challenges, and you'll start residency, then you got to get good at surgery, then you got to do all this other shit. So, life is just like that. So don't get caught in that trap. Enjoy these times. You'll look back at medical school favorably. You'll with nostalgia. Of course, it's stressful. There'll be some times you look back and be like, damn, that was terrible. But just, enjoy the process and of life itself. And then Jake, you could take us home.
Yeah, I just echo that, and I think something that Mike said before he left that's profound too is bring something to the table. There's a couple second years at University of Incarnate Word who are running these research studies where they just saw people publish in other fields, and they're like, oh, we can do that because it's something that you can find the data online. They're like, oh, I could do that, I have a computer. And they hit me up with the project rolling and say, would you be our PI for this? We don't have a program. And I was like, yeah, for sure. And it turned out to be awesome. And, so guess who I'm, in our program directors here, and looking forward to rotating with us in 2 years and trying to make sure they come here, so if you can bring something to the table, that's a whole different conversation than, hey, I get emails every week. Hey, Dr. Checketts, can I do research with you? You do a lot. This is one of the first times I've had someone say, hey, we have this. Will you give us your blessing and be a senior author on it? And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Bring something to the table and it'll really set you apart.
OMM, don't forget OMM, guys. Andrew Taylor Still is watching us from heaven. He wants us to do OMM. All right, guys. Yeah, honestly, ortho, man, you can do a freaking myofascial release before your surgeries and after.
You best believe in my clinic, I'm going to be setting everybody's fibula, and I'm going to be billing for it. So
dude, yeah,
so great.
I mean, it's there. Why should we deprive ourselves? Let me stop the recording.